Hello and welcome to another collective worship. Let's greet each other with peace to start. Peace be with you. And now, while you get yourself sitting comfortably and perhaps have a little bit of a fidget, I'm going to light our virtual candle. So I hope you're sitting comfortably. Today, we're going to talk about someone called Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah was someone in the Bible a long time before Jesus. And today we're going to think about how he wouldn't give up and how he kept going. So the story starts when the people of Jerusalem were attacked by the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians destroyed the city walls. They burnt the temple where the Jewish people worshipped God, and they took all the golden treasures out of the temple. And worse still, they took most of the people out of the city and all of the leaders, and they took the people back across the desert to the Babylonian Empire, where they would be slaves in Babylon. The people were sad. Well, that's a bit of an understatement. The people were devastated and terrified. This was awful, the worst thing they could ever imagine. But God sent people, prophets, to give them God's message. The prophets told them to hold on to their faith. God was with them, and that they should try and learn something from this terrible situation. They should hold on, because in the end, it would be okay. And so the people held on to their faith in God. They held on, and they held on for a very, very long time. They persevered. And eventually, the Babylonian Empire was defeated by the Persian Empire. King Cyrus was in charge of the Persian Empire, and he was prompted by God to allow the people taken as slaves from all across the Middle East to go home. And he wrote this in the official records. And you know, we still have one of those official records in the British Museum in London today. And many of the Jewish people wanted to go home. They wanted to return to Jerusalem. And their neighbours in Babylon gave them gifts, and King Cyrus gave them back the golden treasures from the temple. And it was a long way that they had to travel back to Jerusalem. But they did it. And when they got there, they started to rebuild the altar that was at the heart of the temple so they could worship God together. And they started to rebuild houses for them to live in. But it was a big job. And back in Babylon, a Jew called Nehemiah had stayed behind. And he had visitors who told him what it was like in Jerusalem. He heard that the walls were just piles of stone and rubble, and that the gates hadn't been replaced. They told him that the Jews living in Jerusalem were in danger and had no protection from their enemies because the walls were broken down. Nehemiah was really sad about this, and he prayed about it and prayed for an opportunity. And because Nehemiah worked for the king of Persia, God gave him an opportunity to speak to the king. One day when he was serving wine to the king suddenly asked, "Why do you look so sad?" And Nehemiah answered, "The walls of my home city in Jerusalem are in ruins, and the gates haven't been replaced. The people are in danger." So the king gave Nehemiah letters, a bit like a passport that we use when we go travelling, so Nehemiah could travel safely to Jerusalem. and the king gave him wood to rebuild the gates. So Nehemiah set off on the long journey to Jerusalem. When he arrived, he rested and then set out to inspect the walls of the city, and he saw what a mess they were in. But he didn't give up. He called the leaders of the city together in Jerusalem. And he said, God is with us. It's time to rebuild the walls and make our city safe for the people to worship God. So the people joined in and began to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. But not everyone was pleased. Not everyone thought this was a good idea. Some people didn't want the Jews to rebuild the walls of their city. Some tried to say that they were rebelling against the king and causing trouble. This wasn't true. They were just wanting to get the Jews into trouble. But Nehemiah stood up to them and said, no, we've got permission from the king to rebuild the walls. It's okay. We're going to carry on. So the people worked hard, rebuilding the walls of their city. Even the high priest and the temple workers joined in and helped with the rebuilding. But some people began to tease them, made fun of them. You're too feeble to build the walls. You'll never do it, they said. Even a fox climbing on those would knock the stones down again. But the builders prayed to God and they carried on with their work. Then some people began to attack the builders. So Nehemiah put guards around the walls to protect the building work. And then, another difficulty. The builders were exhausted by their hard work and they were afraid they would be attacked. But Nehemiah encouraged them. Remember, God is with us, he said, and he made sure there were enough guards to protect the builders and to protect the walls, and the work carried on. Then there was yet another problem. Some of the Jews were very, very poor, and they had borrowed money to pay for the building work. But then the money lenders demanded their money back. And if the poor people couldn't pay, they took away their land. And now they couldn't grow any food to eat. Nehemiah was cross. Well, he was furious. This is unjust, he told the money lenders. And he made the money lenders treat the poor people fairly. And so the work carried on. The walls were mended. All that was needed now was some new gates. But then Nehemiah's enemies tried to trick him into leaving Jerusalem. They sent him a letter inviting him to a town far away so that they could kill him. But Nehemiah was warned and didn't fall into their trap. Eventually, the building project was completed. The Jewish people had held on to their faith through all of these difficulties. Despite everything, they had persevered. Now Jerusalem was safe and secure again. They could worship God. How many difficulties they had had to overcome. I wonder if you can remember them all. Perhaps you could pause the video for a moment and talk to the person next to you and see how many difficulties and problems they had to overcome. Well, these are the difficulties that I thought of. Lots and lots of them. But they persevered and kept going. I wonder I hope you've not faced all of these difficulties, but I wonder how many problems you've faced sometimes when you've been trying to do the right thing. Maybe you've been tired and worn out. Maybe you've been teased and made fun of. Or perhaps, I hope not, but perhaps you've been told you weren't good enough. All of these are really awful things to have to face. Perhaps you want to pause the video again and share with your class what the problems are that you've had to face. And now, can you remember how the Jewish people overcame their problems? Well, first of all, there was Nehemiah. Nehemiah believed in what he was doing, and that kept him going, and that meant that he kept everyone else going too. If you believe in something, it's good and the right thing to do, then you can encourage other people to persevere. And then the people worked together, didn't they? And if something's difficult, working in a team is a really good way to keep going. And then the king also helped them, didn't he? The good king, Cyrus, said that they could do the jobs, and he gave them permission to do it, and he gave them supplies to do it. And people in charge can really help us. If you're struggling with something, you can talk to a grown-up that you trust, someone in charge, like your mum and dad, or a teacher, or the head teacher, and they will help you carry on doing the good things. And Christians believe, and Jews believe, and many other people who have faith believe that they can ask God for help, that God will give them the strength to carry on, to keep going and persevere. So now I'm going to finish our collective worship by talking to God and asking God to help. If you'd like to make it your prayer, maybe you could stop the video and read the words on screen, or perhaps if you've got some problems that you would like God to help you with, you could put in your own words. Or you can just say Amen at the end. But if you're not sure about God and talking to God in prayer, then why don't you just use the words as some reflection to think about how you can persevere and do the right thing. So let's have a moment of quiet and reflection together. Loving God, thank you that you are with us when we face difficulties. Help us to be strong to overcome problems. Help us to be determined to keep going. And help us to be courageous to do the right thing. Amen. So thank you for sticking with this assembly and listening to me right to the end. And now to finish, let's say goodbye by wishing each other peace. Peace be with you. Goodbye.